Welcome to another episode of Salesforce Trails and Trials, where we help you accelerate your career and turn soft skills into hard money by mining gold from project failures, bringing insights from ecosystem experts and inspiration from others on the trail. Now joining us with over 20 years in the ecosystem, please welcome our host, Jon Klein.
Welcome, Erik. It's episode 19, and
That
it's
is
great to see you.
unbelievable. Great to see you too.
Wow. Well, and my cat Willow is joining us as well, so very good.
All right, keep it casual. Ever since COVID, somebody walks by in the background, or our kid knocks on the door, or my wife delivers a sandwich while I'm working, whatever, which is delightful. Thank you, Michelle. It's like it's all normal. It's still professional.
Yes, I love it. Remember that there was that CNN guy getting interviewed,
Yes.
and his housekeeper came in with the kid, and he
Yes.
just got the kid and he put him on his lap, and he just
Yeah.
kept doing the interview.
Yes, I
I
do.
love the fact that that guy got so many accolades. Just
Yeah.
like, yes, that's exactly what we're supposed to do.
Yep.
You know?
So yeah, that cat's welcome. What's its
I
name?
love that for sure. And I love seeing Elon Musk with his like 6-year-old in the suit
Yeah.
that he just carries him around and takes him into all the meetings. I'm just like, that's amazing.
That's cool. Yeah, it's
What
totally
a gift
cool.
for that kid. Well, cool. One thing we were talking about before the show started, which was our proximity. So I follow a guy, his name's Vin, and I follow him because he also teaches great intangible skills on communications.
Yep.
And he talked to me, or in his video, he was talking about this idea of, I think he called it like proxematics, something like that, that essentially it's the study of space,
Mhm.
the distance you are from people.
Mhm.
And so he highlighted, when you're standing next to someone, if you're right next to them, that's like intimate space, right? That's very few people in your life. And then
Right,
the
you call
next
those people
one,
close talkers.
yeah, right. That's like your wife that's very, very close, whispering to somebody.
Uh-huh.
Then he highlighted next level is personal space. So this is still where, you're really close friends and family. You can smell each other's breath, right? Your arms reach, you can put each other's arms on shoulders. And then the third one, which is social space. If you're at an event, somebody kind of enters your space, social space. So he highlighted and said, well, how do we take that to the virtual realm? He's like, all those things apply when we're on Zoom. And so he highlighted one where he's like right in front of the camera on Zoom, and he's like, where am I? Right? And everybody's like, oh, I'm in intimate space right now. Right? And he's like, oh, how about now? Well, I'm in personal space. And so that's why right today, what I'm trying is to move back a little bit. And so you can see my hands and my arms, because that is what conveys personal space to people. And so I've moved my camera back, which you see more of my background, and I had to make some adjustments. So I'm trying to move into people's social space.
I think it's good. I think we were joking earlier about my face being too close to the camera. I brought it up, and this is an interesting topic. I think it totally makes sense.
Yeah. So I think I still have to do something here because, I think I'm a little far away because this is supposed to be like a pinch above you.
Okay.
Right.
Got
But
it.
anyways, we digress. But everybody who's on Zoom, everybody listening, you do Zoom meetings. It's really good to think about your frame and to think about what kind of, proximity you're conveying in your camera.
Yeah. Yeah. And you give yourself room to lean in. I think you still can have an effect when you lean into the camera and then you lean back. I think which causes a rise in intensity
Interest and
in person or interest. I think
Yes.
if you start from far away, it gives you room to come in, but then come back. And I think also applicable. So cool topic.
I agree. So, all right. So let's talk our people first minute, an anecdote. I'll start with mine. This week we had a project that essentially we're migrating a Visual Force page to a Lightning Web Component. Great.
Yeah.
And essentially there were lots of little nuances inside this Visual-Force page. So when we went through it, we had a discovery video that highlighted some of these elements. And the client also, when we discussed it with them, really focused on the new things they wanted the future page to do.
Right.
And
Right.
so, of course, the client wanted to focus on the new things. And so the team, the business analyst focused on all the new things that they wanted to see happen. And just assumed that because we had the video and such, that the developer, when they handed it over, would know, of course, the existing things need to be in there,
Right.
but I'm going to put subtasks in for the new things because those are the things the client really wanted to talk about. And it was
Right.
handed over. And
Right.
what do you think happened with the developer?
I fear the worst.
Well, they did a great job building the new things,
Right.
right? I mean, they had the standard items are there, right? The
Well, the
record
requirements were
saves,
fresh in
edit.
mind and they were very specific and
Yeah, and the client wanted to leave all that stuff behind. It was just tech debt. They never used it. So we just built all the new things. And it was a great example of the importance of making things explicit.
hmm,
Everything's great. The client loves the product, right? But we did have to go back and say, you know what? It's really a timing thing. We should have explicitly declared all of these existing features that are on this Visual Force page and had you pick and choose and kind of have a disposition on each one. Do you like
right.
it? Love it? Want to keep it? Want to change it? And then also have the new things. And now we have one consolidated list of what the future state of that Lightning Web component needs to
Yeah.
look like. So it's a
Do you have
really good
anything?
lesson for
It is.
everybody.
Do you have anything, or have you seen in your past in consulting a standard procedure or set of documents or an approach to make room for that explicit thing? I have one from my days in consulting, but have you ever seen that?
Yeah, we call it a disposition sheet. So
Okay.
essentially it is that list that has their disposition. Because even if they say, I don't like it, I don't want it, I want that noted.
Yeah. When I was at Accenture, we used to do at the end of every like statement of work where we were drawing up a contract or statement of work, it was a high level, business requirements. Maybe we threw in technical design too, but then we went through and said, here's a page of assumptions, and here's what's in scope, and here's what's out of scope. And we try to be as explicit as possible. And I'm trying to imagine what could go wrong. No, we're not going to customize your UI to include custom colors or style sheets. No, we're not going to,
Fan game.
no rounded corners on stuff, whatever the challenges were. Um, and I found that part of the process kind of fun because it was sort of imagining worst case scenarios, and I felt like I was securing the success of the project by just making up a big old list of what things I think is in the program and what
Right.
is not in the program. And that was I was told to do that. That wasn't my idea, and I was shown examples. But it sounds like you've seen something like that before, and I presume like most consultants do that, or they maybe they don't if they haven't run into this problem. But it was a great way to just be explicit with the customer at the
Yeah,
end.
and the assumption, right? It was a very honest assumption, and what came out of it was actually there's a positivity. The business analyst was really saying, our developers are so amazing.
Yeah,
They're so skilled. They know all of these elements that they're supposed to do. And the answer was that, yes, they do know, but they live in a swim lane of what they are asked to do. So they
yeah,
know what needs to be done. But in this
yeah.
case, you only ask them to build the new items, and they're going to focus on what you asked for.
Yeah, especially if there's a deadline, like no developer is gonna, well, a good developer is not gonna volunteer scope.
Hmm.
They're gonna figure out what the scope is, build that,
Yes,
and try to hit
exactly.
the deadline.
Yeah, so that's the amazing thing is that this was a very positive assumption. It was
Yeah,
leaning on the very high capability and respect, but it still resulted in the idea that we had to go back to the client and say, "Hey, here, we got to roll through the sheet. We should have done it the first time, but now we have the sheet. Let's roll through, let's confirm what you want, and then let's go build it."
yeah,
So it wasn't very consequential, but it was important and a great learning, I thought, here from a people first minute, because if you don't catch that and you don't have a great relationship with the client, that starts to go through and it can be really problematic, right? Because now people are blaming, they're throwing each other under the bus. And if you're on a really tight deadline, it can really take the project south.
yeah. I mean, the developer communicated expectations that were like, hey, the project is done. And the assumption of what the project scope was different between the BA and the developer. So then the BA says, yeah, to his boss, I hear it's almost done. And then all of a sudden there's a surprise. It's like, oh, it's
Yeah.
not
Right.
done.
How far did that communication go, right? Because the client's like, oh
Yeah,
my gosh, we're coming in under budget, under time. It's
miracle,
amazing.
miracle. Too good to be true.
Yeah. So what's on your mind this week for your people first minute?
Just talking about people first and like, along the lines of assumptions, um, and just developing skills. And this is sort of a basic one that probably most of our listeners have, but uh, you know, you come out, you start consulting, and who knows what your background is. You probably can write an email, but there's this whole concept of, are you writing an email that meets your persona, your audience? Um, does your audience like a lot of data? Do they want the backstory? Do they want the ins and outs of all your decision thought process, or do they just want the conclusion?
Hmm.
And maybe they just want the conclusion. I would call it an executive format. What's the request or what's the conclusion at the top? What's the ask at the top? And then, when you format your email, then the rest of the email can be the background.
Hmm.
But kind of upfront, I think a lot of executives want to see what's the conclusion, what's your recommendation, and then if they want to know why, they can read the rest of the email.
Hmm.
But I think I was taught, probably when I started consulting, don't tell the whole story first and put the good stuff at the bottom, like what the conclusion is or what the recommendation is, because no one wants to read that much just to figure out how you got to where you're going. Like, tell me
Hmm.
what I need to know. So that I had been through that kind of coaching already. I'd been at Accenture probably for 2 or 3 years at this point. And, when you're first a consultant, they don't put you in touch with the customer because you got to shape you have to learn to be concise.
Hmm.
So I was mentoring an intern on my project, and he was very involved and a computer science guy and, smart. And we gave him a project, and this is about sort of my mistake in making an assumption about, how it would go. I had no idea that the impact would be what it was. And then also it ties in with my highlight here, which is about feedback and about how feedback is not something to be afraid of. So they gave this guy the project, and there was a client to interact with, and my intern had come to a conclusion and it was well reasoned, and I liked his reasoning. I said, "Great, send Alan, the client, an email with your recommendation, and ask him if he has any objections." And I didn't ask to proofread it. I'm 26. He's 20. And Alan gets this email and he forwards it to me and basically says, WTF is this? And it was 3 paragraphs on a very rational, Socratic, philosophical thought process about how all the things that were considered. And then in the end, the question is, do you want to go left or do you want to go right? Whatever the decision is. And I guess the client didn't make the problem simpler. It just made it more complex because it raised all the issues. And so that was mistake one. The mistake two that I made is I said to this kid, I said, "Hey, come here. What happened with this email? Um, Alan didn't like it. He found it confusing. Uh, I should have asked you to preview it with me." And I can't remember. This is so long ago. But my mistake also was I didn't deliver the feedback right.
Hmm.
And so I shut him down and he felt scolded and he did a bad job. And it was my mistake. So the two lessons are basically I'm seeing it today when I give people feedback, right? Salesforce, we don't always give each other feedback.
Hmm.
You got to give each other feedback. If you get feedback, it's a gift. Imagine your whole life and no one gave you feedback.
Hmm.
You would suck at your job.
Hmm.
We don't know ourselves what's expected of us just within our own experience. We have to hear from our clients, who have different perspectives, different business units they come from. They have to tell us if we're wrong or right, or they have to coach us on the messaging of something. And
Hmm.
so don't take that feedback as critical of you. You did the best you could in the situation you were given. Take that feedback and just roll with it. So that's like point number one. And point number two is when you give the feedback, acknowledge the work that went in to whatever is requiring feedback, acknowledge what was right, and then coach somebody in the right direction on how it could be changed differently to have the desired impact or the better impact. So that's just feedback is a gift, but you got to watch how you give it because even if you mean well, it can not land right. So thinking about soft skills, that's one that was like I didn't have it, and I hope I have it now. I try. So
That's great feedback, and something that certainly will happen all the time in a team environment and really should, right? I mean, we should all be
yeah,
seeking out that feedback, and learning how
yeah.
to give it helps us learn how to receive it too.
And I went through, I think I got broken in a good way. About 10 years into my time at Salesforce, I went through a promotion to what's called Distinguished Technical Architect. And I had to go through a panel of people who were grilling me. And to prepare for that, I had to get feedback on my presentation from 6 people. And they all gave me sensitive feedback in a good way. It was great. All the feedback was different. One guy said, do this part longer. One part said, no, do this part longer. That part's not interesting. It was conflicting feedback. But that gave me the perspective to understand there's differing opinions on
Mhm.
what my product is. And so I want your feedback, but in the end, I'll have to decide which feedback I accept and where I lean in and whatever, and just to be aware that there's differing opinions. And after that time, I don't think I took the feedback as critical of me so much anymore. I think
Gotcha.
I think I got a whole onslaught of it, and I was kind of like, okay, let me just take it and roll, take it and roll, take it and
Yeah, it
roll.
started to turn into, it's much like in the beginning, like an athlete. They might take the initial feedback that's personal, but pretty soon it's like, oh no, this is just coaching now. This is just
Right.
helping me work through the mechanics and helping me run faster, helping
Yeah.
me make my curves better.
Yeah. Yeah. So a bit of a tangent there about my own being broken on receiving feedback, but and hopefully everybody gets to a point where like the feedback is like, great, got it, thanks, I'll
Well, I
take
hope
it.
yeah, I think that gentleman is was better off for it. I'm sure you made it
We're all
great.
better off.
And
I did. I made amends. So yeah,
cool. So let's go into a little bit of what's going on the career news
yeah,
and trends related to Salesforce.
yeah.
Lots, a year in right now, so lots of, summaries and little in hindsight articles being posted these days.
Uh-huh.
What have you been seeing?
So I'm a Reddit reader. That's a bit of my nighttime reading. It's probably not the greatest thing because it's just basically scrolling on the black screen, which is, not the deepest thought process, but maybe that's what I want at that time of night. But when I end up reading is short little articles and posts by people asking about Salesforce careers in the Salesforce subreddit or Salesforce developer subreddit.
Hmm.
And there's people asking about how do I get started? There's people asking about are certifications worth it? How do I level up? Or how do I move from being an admin to a senior admin? How do I distinguish myself?
Hmm.
In the large pool of Salesforce certified people that are out there, what makes people look different? And so I see a lot of those questions and a lot of people chiming in that area. That's where I mostly hear about Salesforce careers from an admin and consulting perspective. What about you?
That's good. I appreciate you sending some of those over because I love to respond to those. And that's certainly something that any listener, you can feel free. You can call 540 trial 75 if you have a question for us. You can reach out on socials. We're happy to help. We, of course, have lots of opinions on that topic and want to help you get hired and get promoted. I think one thing that was interesting to me is there's a group called TEDx. They have like a consulting side and they do this annual report. And they I'm not exactly sure how they do their data gathering, but they saw that from 2023 to 2024, that
Mhm.
there was a 30% reduction in the demand for Salesforce developers,
Huh.
which was interesting because in my history, it certainly seems like the Salesforce developer has been towards the top of the value chain,
Yeah.
kind of the echelon in the Salesforce space. And I found it fascinating that it was the most significant drop in all of the roles was on the developer side. And one other element that came out of this report is that this was the first year that they have measured that supply exceeded demand
Uh-huh.
in
Yeah.
the Salesforce world.
Yeah.
And so that goes back to some of those questions you were highlighting on Reddit and the subreddit is people are wondering, how do I get ahead as they're probably experiencing a little more competition for each one of those roles right now
Yeah.
and in the near future. And so learning how to distinguish yourself and kind of rise to the top of those potential candidates is a key element. Now, I highlighted this related to developers because I find it interesting in that, for example, with my team the other day, I was just showing and I was highlighting an example on, using Chat GPT, like some consumer AI, and I just said, hey, write me a Lightning Web component that just says "Hello World," and it did, and it
Yeah.
highlighted it. It gave tips. It had some feedback. It defined the components. And then I said, okay, now write me an Apex class that fetches the names of my accounts and sort them by date.
Yeah.
Okay. And it did. And it gave explanations as to the variables and best practices with links to documents. And then I said, create test code for that Apex class.
Yeah.
And it did. And that's an example to me. I've already on the, as a sidebar, I've been doing, robotic testing. And you've heard of Provar and
Yeah.
there's lots of these tools out there. That's been going on for a decade. And so that aspect of living in the structured world of a developer that I guess makes sense of why there might be a little bit of role erosion in that the beginning parts of that is not that those Apex tools or the LWC doesn't need to be modified by a developer, but it gets people 50% there, 80% there, depending on the simplicity of the task.
Hmm.
So I wondered what your thoughts are, and do you think that it's having an impact on the developer space, like some of these automated tools, like even Salesforce has the developer assistant, right?
Yeah. So a couple thoughts. Um, as I look back on 2023, we came out of COVID. Salesforce on Wall Street, whatever, had a fairly good time during COVID in terms of revenue because a lot of companies needed to go digital.
Mm-hmm.
And so that ended up being people who bought more Salesforce licenses. And they went towards Slack and they had to zoom in on their business and lots of reasons. Coming out of COVID, my memory is that there was sort of the growth of Salesforce didn't grow as much that year. And my feeling about that year is that customers were not wanting to spend as much money in general. I don't have the numbers here, but this is a gut feel about how that year was. Felt like there was a slowdown in general that year. And so my question, I can't Google it right now, but my question would be, was it just Salesforce or was it a lot of IT consulting in general? Because it's billable hours. Do we really need it right now? What are the highest priority projects? Sales is working, service is working. We really need to fix X. And who knows if it was back to office, or who knows if revenue had slowed down, or margins were being impacted by inflation, or whatever the issues were. So that would cause, no matter what the cause, though, that would cause suddenly, if there were 100,000 developers in the world and they were all staffed and we were adding 20% a year or 5% a year, and then suddenly there was a slowdown, now suddenly the supply would exceed the demand. And you do, you would have people who were like, what the heck? I had a job, I was a consultant and I was able to find work and suddenly I can't. Or maybe we don't need as many of your hours on our project anymore. And so, and it was the higher priority jobs that probably still remained. The harder jobs probably were still staffed. Integration, architecture, data, architecture, analytics, I think are things where companies needed efficiency out of what they had, and so they probably leaned into these more technical things. Um, And so I do see, and so then as we go forward, what you knew, what I knew last year, the year before, isn't enough to make me relevant because there's so many people in technology always trying, they're technically curious and they're always learning.
Hmm.
And you can't stop. And being a Salesforce admin was differentiating a few years ago. Being an Apex coder was differentiating a few years ago. A lot of people can do that. And also with Apex, ChatGPT can do your Apex
Hmm.
at a low, mm, at an unscalable level. Like you're not coding for scale. You're not writing test cases for great accuracy.
Hmm.
You'll check the checkbox. Your trigger will work, but will it work at scale? I don't know about that. So there's
Sure.
now we get into what do you know that makes you differentiated compared to everybody else? And maybe it's your enterprise Apex programming skills, which are not well known. How
Hmm.
do you write code so that test classes execute really, 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 really quickly?
Yeah, or polymorphic code.
Yeah,
You can use across
absolutely.
objects.
And that's something you don't run into when you do your first project, unless you're working at, a huge bank or a huge customer that
Mhm.
has 4 million, 10 million, 20 million contacts, and you have to think about scale. Um, the cool thing about Salesforce as an industry also is that we keep adding new stuff to learn. I mean, it's frustrating. I have to learn it just like everybody else. Um, now we have Data Cloud as of a year ago, and that's keeps their release schedule is like every 6 to 8 weeks, there's more features
Hmm.
like the rest of core CRM. Um, and then now there's AgentForce, and AgentForce is different than it was in its pilot phase
Yeah,
back in July.
AgentForce 2.0 was just released this year, or
That
excuse
was
me, this week.
that was this week, and
Hmm.
it has new features. So there's an article that's on Salesforce Bend. If you guys don't know Salesforce Bend, I love the website. It's got so much great content from people who are in the field as consultants, writing opinions on how to do something interesting on
Hmm.
Salesforce or something they learned. And they have an article about Salesforce niches. And it's not good enough to be just a generalist. Everybody needs to be have the general skills, but if there's a niche that you can get into where there's still room to be first, it's Data Cloud and Agentforce. And it's not just the technical side, it's the consulting and advisory side. How do you help somebody understand what they can do
Hmm.
with an agent, or how to think about building a business case for an agent, or of all the things you could do with an agent, which ones have the ROI? That is something that our customers need help being led through for the most part. And there's still a lot of opportunity there. The opportunity is probably not in page layouts and custom fields and custom objects.
Right.
Um, that can be outsourced. That is not difficult. And so if you need to find a niche, and CPQ would be a niche. Analytics, Tableau's been around forever. Um, I would say, have two or three niches. Go learn a new niche every year, and play with it. So, as far as helping people with their jobs, like in job careers or Salesforce careers, go where not everybody is, where it's new and growing, especially if you have technical skills, go where not everybody can
Yeah, be
go.
a pioneer.
Be a
Right.
pioneer. Data Cloud requires SQL skills.
Hmm.
Salesforce in general required SOQL skills, but there's not a lot of outer joins and you know
Sure.
deep SQL queries happening. Data Cloud requires data modeling, requires SQL skills, requires considerations for real-time processing, um, cost benefit analysis of real-time versus batch, API and integrations, both inbound and outbound. It's a it's not just for the admin, and there's a lot of opportunity there for people with those more technical skills. Those aren't the people first skills that I'm talking about, that you're talking about. There are plenty of people first skills on top of this too. That's all about, well, how do you activate and bring revenue to your customer, and think about, like, well, what's the user experience for the user, or for the marketing person who has to do this. So there's all kinds of opportunity whether you're technical or not in this
Hmm.
space.
No, it's really good. So it's we'll transition to what we're excited about here, and I think you touched on a couple elements. So we have an article coming out soon on Salesforce Ben. It's essentially responding to a previous article they had about, does Salesforce have a bad partner problem?
Oh yeah.
And we wanted to give people a quick checklist of 3 questions they can ask to smoke out whether they have a good partner or not.
Yeah.
And another one is a future episode here, which we're going to help organizations who are considering essentially both partners who are trying to help people think about AgentForce. It's very difficult for them to think about how to smoke out and understand, like, what's the political will, what's the that institutional readiness of the organization, because most people, when they think about AI, I wonder how many people actually use like consumer AI on a regular basis. I mean, people use it when they're going to Amazon and stuff, but as far as going to Chat GPT and asking it a question and getting back details, I don't
Yeah.
know that a lot of people do that today. I mean, they're significant, but I don't think it's like more than half.
No, I would guess it's 5%,
Yeah, I
10%.
think it's very
Some of the early
small.
adopters and people
Right.
who are
So,
interested in optimization, interested about knowledge,
mhm.
doing something the best. I think that's who goes to the, well, there's those people and there's people who cheat on their papers.
Right. True.
Or there's teachers using it as teaching assistants, which is also a great way to use it.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I think about that, and I think about, let's just take your typical mid-market organization. It's a couple hundred people,
Yeah.
and the leadership says, we're excited about bringing AI into the organization. Okay,
Yeah.
what's the general emotional state of most of those people when they hear that?
Defensiveness probably.
Yeah, like, oh, it's going to take my job,
Or I
because
got to
that's what
learn
I
something
hear all the
new.
time. AI is going to eat my job.
It's process change. Yeah.
Right. And so, because if people were using consumer AI and they're just like, they go to Chat GPT before the meeting and they help maybe, outline their notes and they organize their stuff and they get a little research and they recognize AI wouldn't replace me in this meeting, but it
Yeah.
sure did help me sharpen up.
Yeah. Or have you ever used an automated, I think you might use it between us here, automated AI transcription and summary of a meeting?
Every day.
I have seen people, salespeople, like be delighted that they don't have to take notes anymore in a meeting and they can actually be fully dedicated to
Yes.
listening because something else is transcribing. We know it to be reliable. It's one of the easier AI things you can deploy. And that's a really good one.
Right. So I want to try and provide a kind of a talk track, if you will, for leadership at partners who are trying to help people on board to the idea. Because
Mhm.
if people can't imagine what it's like, they can never execute,
Yeah.
right? And move forward. And so, and in the same thing within an organization, if a leader wants to make AI part of their organization, because they need to. I mean, the path to obsolescence, from my perspective, is pretty clear. The people who steer clear of AI as it relates to their organization,
Yeah.
it's going to come quickly,
Yeah.
because things are
I mean, I
growing.
think that there's a great expression, I think, that is you won't be replaced by AI, but you will be replaced by somebody who knows how to use AI.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
when we interview now for people, at the developer level, we ask people, and how do you use AI yourself? I
Hmm.
want to hear some great examples because that is differentiating. That's productivity and excellence. You're augmenting yourself. You're raising your own performance level, especially in any area where you're not super skilled in, greatly just by asking AI some basic questions and helping it walk you through the thought process.
Yeah, that's a great future episode as well, to complement our prior episode, which was how to prepare for a Salesforce interview. So good stuff. So some
Carl,
things.
just before you go on, you just mentioned, let's see, we might have to edit this part out. It was Salesforce by an article on partners and bad partners. And I sent you, I think, a subreddit about somebody asking this question and why projects go wrong. And there's so much, I
Mhm.
think, soft skill, people first, common concepts that people come up with as partners who are saying, yeah, it does exist. It does happen. This is often what I see happens and some really good dialogue in there about why that happens. So once again, Salesforce subreddit.
Yeah, no, it's good. And I actually referenced that article in
Oh,
my
cool.
Salesforce Ben piece.
Yeah, it was a lot of thoughtful, frank, good conversation in there. That was awesome.
Yep, that's good. I'm glad we're talking about it, right? Because I think a
Yeah.
lot of people, I mean, when's the last time someone came up to you and said, "Hey, Eric, cool, check this out, man. There's this cool project failure." It's like, never. Right? Um,
And
so
when I say a lot, it
yep.
happens. I don't think this is general consulting. I've seen it go wrong. Like huge companies, they go from Accenture to Deloitte to some other consulting firm, and no firm wants to pick up the old firm's work. And
Hmm.
so you lose track of who did what last on the consulting job. So even good consultants, just like the beginning of this podcast, your business analyst assumed the dev knew to include the baseline. The new consultant does not go learn necessarily everything the old consultant
Hmm.
had to overcome to develop, to where they are now. And the business conditions have probably changed and things like that. So there's a lot of reasons why it's not easy to get a project right.
That's true. It's a really good point. It's not the default for sure. Um, so I think, another thing I'm excited about, I'm going to Boston over the vacation, which will be super
Ah,
fun. Hopefully there's some snow. And I also reviewed an app called the Metazoa
mhm,
app. They're not a sponsor yet,
mhm.
but it's a very interesting. I'll tell you. I'll share one story because I'm actually going to interview the founder of this organization on a future episode. So we'll learn a
Yeah,
lot more about the app at that point. But what I wanted to highlight here was just the small world. So the
yeah,
app is essentially a repackaging of an app that's very early in the Salesforce ecosystem. It was called,
yeah. Down in San Mateo.
yes, in San Mateo. Such a small world, and great to see that he kept all this alive. And it does some amazing DevOps work. It does data movement. It's a really, really cool app. And they've really gone deep on security by avoiding intermediaries. So it avoids some cloud conditions, but it does that so it can be very fast and it keeps the point-to-point security really,
Yeah,
really strong for data egress.
yeah.
So we're going to learn more about that in a future episode, but I just thought I love the small world of, seeing somebody come out of nowhere with a cold email. I learn about the product and come to find out I met the founder back in 2006 at the same Salesforce event.
That is amazing.
Always fun.
That's so cool. So the thing I was thinking about, so what I'm excited about is uh we've been talking about AgentForce. We've been talking about I went this week, I was in Chicago, last week I was in Dallas, and we're doing these customer facing world tour events. And I did one in Seattle about a couple weeks ago. And we've had great like 20 to 30-minute conversations at this area called the AgentForce Consult area. And what is impressive is that it's amazing when you use an LLM to back up an agent, what a good experience it is from a conversational perspective. Then, as an admin, this I was talking to a customer yesterday. What's amazing, if you've ever configured a bot, and I know you have a
Hmm.
chat bot, you have to define all the utterances.
Hmm.
And if you forget an utterance, you're going to
And
miss.
all the various ways that people might spell it, all the,
Right,
misspellings
right,
and
because
the
it's
I am
chat.
speak and everything. Yes.
So, and then there's a tree that you have to design also of like, when I do this, what happens next? What happens next? With Agent Force, the second revelation is you don't have to do that because the LLM can read your chat and figure out if your
And
intent
reason.
up reason
Yes.
lines up with one of your topics,
Hmm.
the connection is made between your chat and the topic. And then there are many actions within the topic. Which one happens first? I don't know, man. The reasoning engine figures it out.
Hmm.
It's amazing. And so that's what's enlightening. So really cool things about the product, but also we're using a cool tool that we built just for demo purposes. It's called this Agent Force Creator. And the way the demo works when you sit down there is you sit with me. I've got a microphone in front of me. We've got a laptop, and we basically have a bot in Slack. interview you. You speak into a microphone. The microphone transcribes your speech into like 5 paragraphs of text. We submit that back to the bot, you describing your business problems. And then using metadata and a brand new org, we spin up a new org, we deploy a customer-facing website, a community portal, we put an agent, an embedded service on that portal, we create the agent, we do all the configuration, we create topics that we discern from just the speech to text, and then also the scope and the instructions and the actions that you'll need to accomplish your goal that you just described in the 2 minutes where you were saying, these are the primary problems that my customers have on my customer website. This is what they're looking to resolve, and this is how we resolve them. People love the experience. It really feels futuristic. It really feels helpful
Mhm.
because people are new to AgentForce. They don't know how to take their thoughts and break them down into topics, instructions, and actions yet. And
Mhm.
this agent is doing it for them. So I've already given feedback to the product team, like people want this too. Like, wouldn't it be great if you just, as an admin, could talk to the agent creator and say, my primary problem is X. Typically, we resolve the problem this way. It takes too long. The resources I use are X, Y, and Z. I have to swivel between this system and this
Mhm.
system. I look up the customer by customer number. And when that fails, I look it up by this. What's my agent? And it builds my agent for me. Of
Mhm.
course, this is a demo. We don't have real integrations to your backend systems. But an example yesterday, an electric car company person came by my booth and we designed the agent using the interview process. And we started playing with it. As soon as we spin it up, we give you a link you can click on, you can start the agent.
Mhm.
And so we did the happy path. We did one of the easy things, what's the status of my car? When will it be delivered? When's my first payment due? With the basic questions that you have as a new car customer with this company. And then I said, well, let's try something that is not the happy path, because that's also one of the best things you can do, I
Mhm.
think, when you test Agentforce. So it's an electric car. So I asked the agent, will this car work with unleaded gas? And as part of the agent demo, we actually have an API we're using to scrape the content of the website that the customer provided as part of their
Mhm.
lead information. So we knew
Use it
some,
as kind of grounding data.
yeah, for grounding data.
Mhm.
And so we didn't have, all we did was basic grounding data. And the agent comes back and says, well, this car is an electric car, so it actually doesn't need to use unleaded gasoline. I didn't have to write that answer. I didn't
Mhm.
have to tell it to think that. It just had basically a PDF's worth of knowledge in its
Mhm.
grounding vector database,
Wow.
and it was able to just roll with it. So, anyways, I'm excited about the AgentForce creator.
Mhm.
I don't know if I don't think we'll productize it. Who knows? Maybe we'll open source it. Who knows? I don't even know how it runs.
Yeah, well, I hope so. And it's a great example of what, from the consulting side, what I've certainly been looking forward to as like there's so many repetitive tasks inside the admin area.
Yeah,
How long until we have our own prompt and we can start doing prompt engineering around Salesforce administration? And I think that's
totally.
what, like apps like Metazoa, they're doing that today. And it's only a matter of time when Salesforce starts to say, hey, we're going to start to help the admin community and
Yeah.
really start to provide them an agent too.
Yeah. I think it's super cool. We don't even know yet where it's all gonna, how it will become pervasive.
Yeah, love it. Great feedback. So, as we move towards something noteworthy that inspires us, we have a new dog. She's a
Uh-huh.
year old, and we're going to training.
Mhm.
And in the training, they just highlight over and over and over where we have to bring this massive belt, like we have this fanny pack, if you will,
Yeah.
right? This
Yeah.
bum bag, as they say
Snacks and
in the UK, um, full of like high value snacks, right? So it's like the equivalent of like hot dogs.
yeah.
And she just keeps saying that remember what gets rewarded gets repeated.
Hmm.
And just thinking about that is such a good mantra for how I build what I do in Salesforce, right? If I'm going to provide something for a customer thinking about what gets rewarded gets repeated. That's not only on the page, maybe there's some immediate gratification, but also thinking about what metrics that are on the positive side are we measuring that we can then put in a place where they can be recognized.
Mhm.
We usually think about your wrist slaps and like, wall of shame and, only recording things that are out of bounds, but thinking about what's in bounds and what is, an accelerating of the goal or whatever it might be. That's a great mantra for Salesforce to create a great culture and to make people really love the system and recognize that I could not do what I do today without this. And it's not Big Brother. It's like, it's like the big incentive. It's the big opportunity, right? It's the
Yeah.
big winner.
Yeah. I think
What?
it's a good way to think about it. It's very positive. We opened with feedback, and my comments at the end here are about feedback as well. Uh, we talk about providing constructive feedback. You got to do that sometimes. You got to call people out. You got to say this could have been better. After you acknowledge what was great, you got to like say this could have been better. This probably didn't hit because of this. Um, but what gets rewarded gets repeated. That's in the context of dogs. For humans, so I there's what do you do with somebody who's not meeting your expectations in all areas? They're great in some areas, but they're not good in other areas. I read a book called The Essential Drucker. Peter Drucker is this management guy, probably.
I think he worked at the Claremont colleges, right?
Oh,
Just
did he?
miles from.
Was he like in the 60s,
Yeah,
70s?
yeah. He's like the inventor of MBOs, like management by objectives.
Yeah.
Great. One quote from him, just as you continue, is that the
Yeah.
worst thing an organization can do is to do the wrong things really well. I say
Yeah.
that all the time.
Yeah, that's great. So he's written so many books, and these books on leadership and the practice of management. I'm looking at them here on Google. The Essential Drucker, I skimmed it. Can't
Mhm.
say I read the whole thing, but I totally took away one nugget here, which is um, you basically can't get people to get rid of their if somebody is just okay at something but excellent at something else, it's easier to get them to excel at what they're excellent at than to get them to excel at what they're average at. You're fighting an uphill battle, taking somebody who doesn't like to pay attention to details to get them to pay attention to details. You should probably put them in a job where it's a better fit for their excellent level skills, like maybe ideation, creativity, whatever it is. So again, what gets rewarded gets repeated. Somehow that makes me think about reward the positive stuff that this person is doing, like lean into that, find them a role that's just in that space, um, and it keeps it positive. When your dog does many things, reward the ones that actually get
Mhm.
the right attention. When they actually calm down and lie down next to your side, reward that.
Mhm.
It feels like we forget about those things when the dog is finally exhausted and you know stops like jumping all over the place. Like that's when they get the reward. Rewarding that positive action is it's easier probably than punishing. Like, and if you look at dogs don't punish each other. They just nudge each other and say, "Hey, bad move." Like
Yeah.
it's a quick scolding, but that's it. But the rewarding is long and affectionate, and
Mhm.
it probably works better on humans too.
Right. No, I agree. And one of the examples that they gave was, imagine, we think about, yeah, the dog, chewing on something or whatever, right, and trying to reward out of that behavior.
Yeah,
She goes, well, what about those times where your dog, you're just doing nothing. Maybe you're sitting on the couch reading, or you're sitting at your desk like I do here, and the dog just walks in and sits down right next to you.
perfect.
Sometimes some people might say, "Oh, did you need something? Or you just
Exactly.
want food, right?"
Yeah.
Right? That's one attitude we can have, or we can, highlight and be like, "Hey, that's rewarded behavior. You came over here quietly and just sat down. Let's
Yeah.
reward that."
Yeah.
And I think about that not just for my dog, but I could probably be rewarding things like that with my kids,
Yeah.
right? And
Totally.
with lots of other people. So
Totally.
thinking about, like I love back scratches. So I'm trying to, whenever my kids give me back scratches,
Yeah.
I figure out how can I reward them?
Reward that.
You can get that repeated.
Yeah, get that repeated. That's right. That's right.
Well, good stuff. So a couple updates here, just from the show. So we are migrating our podcast host. So we're going to move it. We're building out the website for the Salesforce Trails and Trials right now, and so we're going to host the website, or excuse me, host the podcast there. And the benefit for that is that we'll be able to have channels and things like that. So over time, when we have hundreds of episodes, people only want to see the interviews. People only want to see the shows that we have with Erik, whatever it might be. It's very quickly and easily found, which will be fun. So this whole thing is it's a learning process. I mean, for me, I'm probably older than many other people who are doing podcasts because I wanted to wait till I actually accomplished something in my life. It's no offense to anybody else, but I just wanted to get to a point where I figured, you know what, I do have something to share and I have some evidence to prove it. And so I waited a while. So it's been a fun learning opportunity. So that's fun. And so we'll have more on that a little bit later. But listeners, please give us a follow here, a subscribe. Please share it with somebody who's looking to get hired or get promoted in the Salesforce ecosystem. And any of your business analysts, product owners, architects who are looking to learn, and leave us a message at 540 trial. That's TRIAL 75. We'd love to answer your questions, and you can soon reach out on socials. We'll tell you what those are a little later as we build out the website, but really appreciate your support. And on behalf of Erik and I, we wish you a happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year. And we look forward to connecting with you soon.
Awesome. Yes. Happy holidays.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Salesforce Trails and Trials. If you found this episode valuable, we would love your help reaching others. Please subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, and share this with another who would benefit.